The first message arrived suddenly, without warning. At first, it was just another signal detected by scientists monitoring space. But as the words became clear, it was impossible to ignore. The message came from a force far beyond anything humans had ever encountered, a power that stretched across stars. Yet it spoke directly to the leaders of every nation on Earth. The tone was sharp and demanding. It made one thing clear. The Empire did not want negotiation. It wanted obedience. It demanded complete submission. The words were simple but terrifying. Surrender your freedom. Give up your technology. Follow our rules or face destruction. News of the message spread quickly. Governments scrambled, trying to understand the scope of the threat. Emergency meetings were called, some in secret, others broadcasted to the public. The air in every capital city was tense. Leaders argued about the best way to respond. Some said compliance might save lives. Others believed submission would only bring long-term suffering. Every option seemed risky. Ordinary people watched from their homes, unable to fully grasp the scale of what was happening. Fear and uncertainty spread like wildfire. Families clung to each other, trying to imagine what the future might hold. The world scientists were among the first to react. They studied the message, its origin, and its implications. Could humans even defend themselves against such a power? Was it possible to communicate further, or to find a weakness? Teams of researchers worked day and night, their minds racing, through calculations and possibilities. Meanwhile, engineers examined Earth's defenses, wondering if any existing technology could offer protection. Even ordinary citizens joined in small ways, preparing supplies, learning about survival, and keeping themselves informed. There was a sense that the world had been abruptly thrown into a situation none had ever imagined. Despite the fear, some people began to feel something else, a spark of determination. The Empire expected humans to panic, to bow and obey. But instead, there were quiet discussions in homes, schools, and workplaces about what could be done. Communities talked about helping each other, sharing resources, and preparing for whatever might come. Even children noticed the change. They saw adults working together, listening to news with more attention, and speaking with a seriousness they had rarely shown. The threat from the Empire, though terrifying, began to awaken something that had been dormant in humanity, a shared understanding that survival and dignity were worth fighting for. The Empire's message was a mirror, showing humans what was at stake. Freedom, knowledge, and the right to make their own choices were all on the line. People began to realize that surrendering might save them in the short term, but it would cost them their identity, their culture, and their sense of purpose. The enormity of that realization was overwhelming. Governments that had often been divided by politics or borders found themselves thinking beyond their differences. The planet had never faced such a common threat before, and for the first time, it became painfully clear that humanity's fate depended on unity. Everywhere, ordinary life began to feel strange and fragile. Streets were still busy, but there was a quiet tension. Markets and offices carried on, but conversations were hushed, full of speculation about the Empire and its demands. People shared stories and theories, trying to make sense of a message that seemed almost impossible. Families discussed what survival would require. Young adults wondered about the future they would inherit. Older generations remembered history, thinking of the wars and struggles they had survived, and felt both fear and hope. Humanity had faced challenges before, but this was unlike anything in memory. It was a threat that came from the stars, unimaginable in scale and power. Amid all the fear, some began to see the first signs of courage. Small acts of preparation, kindness, and ingenuity started to spread. Volunteers helped communities get ready. Scientists shared findings with the public. People started taking responsibility for their own survival and for each other. Even in the shadow of an empire that demanded submission, humans began to feel that resistance might be possible. There was a quiet, growing sense that fear alone would not define them. That maybe, just maybe, they could face the challenge together. As days passed, the world continued to process the message. The empire's tone remained uncompromising, its expectations clear. But humanity had already begun its first response, not with weapons or fleets, but with thought, discussion, and unity. Fear had been replaced by careful planning. Anxiety had given way to action. And although the future remained uncertain, there was one undeniable truth. Earth had heard the empire's demands, and the people were no longer willing to bow without considering their own strength. The first chapter of humanity's response had begun, and it would be the foundation for the fight that was yet to come. After the shocking message from the empire, the world began to stir in ways that no one had expected. At first, fear and confusion ruled. Governments debated endlessly, scientists ran simulations, and ordinary people watched the news with a mix of anxiety and disbelief. But slowly, a shift started to happen. Instead of being paralyzed by terror, humanity began to act. The threat had sparked something deep inside every person, a determination to survive, and perhaps to stand up. Governments that had often argued over borders and policies suddenly found themselves talking to each other more than ever. Leaders from different countries, who rarely agreed on anything, now faced the same urgent question. How could Earth respond? Secret meetings were held in capitals across the world. Security councils, military strategists, and scientific committees worked together, sharing intelligence and ideas. What had once been impossible, complete global collaboration, was now the only path to hope. At the same time, ordinary people were stepping into action in their own ways. Communities organized drills, prepared emergency supplies, and trained volunteers. People helped each other understand what might be coming and how to prepare. Schools started teaching students about emergency procedures and the importance of staying united. Families discussed what they would do if the empire acted against Earth. Conversations that had once been about daily life now revolved around survival, strategy, and unity. There was a new seriousness in every discussion, but also a spark of courage. Scientists and engineers were among the busiest. They worked day and night, analyzing the empire's message, trying to understand its technology, and imagining ways to defend Earth. Laboratories and research centers were filled with people racing against time. They studied the energy signals, the technology described, and the possible weaknesses. They shared their discoveries with governments and international organizations, creating a network of knowledge that crossed borders and oceans. Even though the empire was powerful, humans were determined to find a way to protect themselves, no matter how impossible it seemed. In the midst of all this preparation, the media played a crucial role. Reporters and news channels broadcast the events not just with fear, but with careful explanations and stories of resilience. People everywhere began to understand that this was not just a government problem. It was a human problem. Civilians realized that survival depended on knowledge, cooperation, and courage. Ordinary people started to feel that they could be part of the solution. They volunteered for community tasks, helped distribute supplies, and shared vital information. Each small effort added to the growing sense that humanity could respond to this extraordinary threat. Even children, in their own way, felt the change. They saw adults working tirelessly, governments coordinating on an unprecedented scale, and communities coming together. They learned that the world could face challenges far beyond their imagination. Teachers encouraged curiosity, problem-solving, and teamwork. Young people began to discuss ideas about science, strategy, and survival. They were scared, yes, but they were also inspired by the determination they saw around them. Humanity's next generation was already learning to rise to the occasion. Fear was still present, of course. The Empire's message was a constant reminder of the stakes, but fear no longer dominated the world's response. Instead, it was balanced with careful planning, strategy, and hope. People understood that panic would weaken them. Unity, preparation, and knowledge would make them strong. The feeling that had begun in homes, schools, laboratories, and newsrooms spread like wildfire. Humanity might be facing a challenge it had never imagined, but it was not powerless. As days turned into weeks, the world's response became more organized and more visible. Governments announced coordinated defense plans. Scientists published breakthroughs that were shared internationally, and communities worked together in ways never seen before. Streets that had once felt normal now had a sense of purpose. People worked, learned, and prepared not just for themselves, but for the planet as a whole. There was a collective understanding that Earth's survival depended on cooperation and courage. Amid all this, a quiet revolution of spirit took hold. People were no longer waiting for someone else to make decisions. Ordinary citizens became part of a global effort, taking responsibility in small but meaningful ways. Teachers, doctors, engineers, and even farmers contributed knowledge, time, and energy. They built networks of support, shared resources, and encouraged each other to stay calm and focused. The Empire had expected obedience, but what it saw instead was a planet that refused to be passive. Through it all, hope grew. Hope that the unity of humanity could match the power of the Empire. Hope that intelligence, courage, and determination could overcome fear. Hope that Earth might not only survive, but respond in a way that would preserve its freedom and identity. Every step, every plan, every small act of preparation contributed to that hope. Humanity had begun to realize that it could act as one, and that together, people were far stronger than any message of threat could suggest. The world had shifted from panic to purpose. The Empire's demand for submission had sparked the opposite reaction: collaboration, resilience, and determination. The seeds of resistance had been planted, not with weapons yet, but with unity, planning, and courage. Earth was no longer a passive target. It had begun its first steps toward answering the Empire, not with immediate fire, but with preparation, strategy, and a quiet determination that would soon become impossible to ignore. Humanity was awake, aware, and ready to act. The first stage of the response was complete, and the next steps, though uncertain, would be guided by a new sense of purpose. Earth would not surrender without a fight. After weeks of preparation, endless discussions, and tireless planning, humanity reached a moment of truth. The world had heard the Empire's demands, and it had responded with careful analysis, preparation, and unity. But now came the hardest decision of all: to submit or to resist. Leaders across the globe faced sleepless nights, torn between fear for their people and the desire to preserve freedom. Every choice carried weight. Compliance might spare lives in the short term, but it would surrender Earth's future to an empire that showed no mercy. Resistance promised danger, chaos, and loss, but it offered something far greater: the chance to remain human, to remain free. In conference rooms, government chambers, and secret councils, debates raged. Diplomats argued that submission could save the planet, pointing to the unmatched power of the Empire. Military commanders warned that any resistance would likely lead to devastation. Scientists and strategists countered with possibilities, suggesting that Earth's ingenuity and unity could give humanity a fighting chance. The tension was unbearable. Outside, ordinary citizens waited, unaware of the full details, yet sensing that the decisions made in those rooms would determine the fate of every life on the planet, everywhere. The world was holding its breath. Families discussed the news in quiet tones. Students learned about resilience and critical thinking, and communities gathered to support one another. The fear that had gripped people in the early days had not disappeared, but it had transformed. Now it was tempered by determination, by a growing belief that humanity could face this unimaginable challenge together. Ordinary people began to feel empowered. They understood that the future depended not just on leaders, but on collective courage and action. Finally, after hours of deliberation, a decision was made. Humanity would not bow. Humanity would resist. The decision was announced to the world with clarity and resolve. The message was simple, yet powerful. Earth would not submit to the Empire's demands. The announcement was met with shock, awe, and relief. In towns and cities, people poured into streets to listen to the broadcasts. Some cheered, some cried, and some simply stood in stunned silence. It was a historic moment. Humanity had chosen defiance over fear. The impact of this decision was immediate. Hope spread quickly, like a spark igniting dry grass. People felt a sense of purpose they had never experienced before. Volunteers stepped forward to help organize resources. Scientists accelerated their work, and communities doubled their efforts to prepare. Even in the face of a powerful empire, people began to believe that they could shape their own destiny. Courage became contagious. Ordinary acts, sharing knowledge, helping neighbors, preparing for emergencies, took on a new meaning. Each person understood that their contribution mattered, that survival depended on every individual working with every other. The Empire, of course, noticed Earth's response. Their message had demanded obedience, but now it was met with defiance. Analysts and leaders from the Empire likely expected panic and quick surrender. Instead, they saw a planet uniting, learning, and preparing. Humanity's choice to resist challenged assumptions about fear, power, and control. And on Earth, that realization filled people with both anxiety and strength. The Empire was vast and powerful, but humanity had something it could never take away: willpower, courage, and unity. As preparations continued, the world embraced a new mindset. Fear was no longer the driving force. Instead, people focused on solutions, on survival, and on action. Scientists developed strategies for defense and resilience. Engineers and technicians worked on technologies that could protect vital infrastructure. Citizens formed networks to support each other, sharing skills, resources, and information. Every small act added to a global effort that had no precedent in human history. Resistance was not just a decision. It was becoming a way of life. Ordinary people, too, felt the weight of responsibility, but they also felt pride. They knew that their everyday choices mattered more than ever. Parents prepared their children for possible challenges. Teachers inspired curiosity and problem-solving. Workers, farmers, and professionals found ways to contribute to the collective effort. Even simple acts, like sharing food, information, or skills, became meaningful. Humanity was learning that defiance was not just a political choice. It was a shared commitment to survival, freedom, and dignity. With the decision made, unity grew stronger. Borders and differences that had once divided nations now felt insignificant compared to the common threat. International cooperation became real, tangible, and urgent. Countries shared resources, intelligence, and technology. Communities collaborated across continents. People realized that resistance was not just about military or technological strength. It was about standing together, trusting each other, and finding solutions collectively. At the same time, the psychological impact of the choice was profound. Fear still existed, but it no longer controlled humanity. Courage, determination, and hope had become dominant. People slept less, worked harder, and thought more creatively than ever before. They were learning, almost instinctively, that fear could be transformed into preparation and anxiety into strategy. Humanity had taken its first true step into defiance, and with that step came the realization that survival, freedom, and dignity were worth every risk. The decision to resist also inspired the next generation. Young people who had grown up in a world that seemed safe and predictable suddenly faced the reality of cosmic-scale threats. Yet instead of despair, many felt motivated. They joined scientific projects, volunteer programs, and community efforts. They saw the courage of adults, the ingenuity of scientists, and the determination of ordinary people. And in that reflection, they found their own courage. Humanity's choice to resist was not just about the present, it was about inspiring everyone, especially the young, to understand the value of freedom, unity, and action. By the time the world had fully absorbed the decision, a new rhythm had emerged. Humanity was no longer waiting for the Empire's next move. People were preparing, learning, cooperating, and strengthening every aspect of life that might be threatened. Fear was replaced by responsibility, despair by determination. What had started as a message demanding submission had transformed into an awakening. Humanity had chosen defiance, and that choice was already shaping the planet in ways that no one could have imagined. The stage was now set for the next phase. Earth's response was no longer theoretical. It had become real in every laboratory, every classroom, every household, and every street. The decision to resist had changed the world. Humanity had faced the ultimate question and chosen courage over fear, unity over division, and freedom over submission. The Empire's demands had been clear, but Earth's answer had become equally clear. This planet would not bow without a fight, and humanity would face the challenges ahead together, with determination, intelligence, and an unbreakable spirit. With the decision to resist firmly in place, humanity entered a new phase: preparation. Fear was no longer the driving force. It had been replaced by determination and a quiet sense of purpose. People everywhere understood that survival depended on action, and they began to prepare in ways they had never imagined. Governments, scientists, engineers, and ordinary citizens all worked together. It was as if the entire planet had awakened to a single goal: to defend Earth and the freedom of humanity. Every country began to mobilize its resources. Military forces were placed on alert, but the focus was not just on weapons or defense. Scientists and engineers worked tirelessly to understand the Empire's possible strategies. They studied every known signal, technology, and pattern that could give humans an advantage. Laboratories and research centers operated around the clock. Teams shared their findings with international partners, breaking down borders for the sake of survival. Knowledge became humanity's first line of defense, and every discovery was celebrated as a victory. Ordinary people played a crucial role as well. Communities organized training programs, emergency drills, and local support networks. Volunteers helped to distribute supplies, educate neighbors, and ensure that no one was left unprepared. Families practiced safety procedures, shared information, and developed plans for every possible scenario. Even children were included in small ways, learning to stay calm in emergencies and to work together with others. Fear was transformed into responsibility, and responsibility into hope. The world's industries also shifted focus. Factories that once made ordinary goods began producing equipment that could support defense efforts. Engineers designed tools and infrastructure that could withstand crises, and communications networks were strengthened to ensure that information could be shared instantly. Every sector of society contributed in some way. Farmers increased food production, technicians maintained vital systems, and scientists explored new technologies that could offer an advantage. The entire planet was moving as one, united by a shared purpose. Information became more important than ever. Media outlets worked to keep people informed, not just about the empire, but about ways to help and participate. They highlighted stories of courage and resourcefulness, showing ordinary citizens doing extraordinary things. These stories inspired others to act. People began to understand that they were not helpless. Each small action, sharing knowledge, preparing supplies, helping a neighbor, added up to a global effort that the empire could not easily predict or control. Innovation accelerated at an incredible pace. Scientists and engineers brainstormed ways to protect critical systems and infrastructure. They tested ideas that had seemed impossible before. From energy management to communication, transportation to defense, every field was being pushed to its limits. Collaboration crossed borders, cultures, and disciplines. What had once been rivalry or competition became cooperation. Humanity was learning to turn pressure into creativity, fear into innovation, and challenge into opportunity. The psychological impact of this preparation was profound. People who had once felt helpless now had a sense of control. They understood that survival was not just about hiding or hoping. It was about thinking, learning, and acting. Courage grew alongside knowledge. Communities bonded as they shared responsibilities and relied on each other. Individuals felt proud to contribute, knowing that their actions mattered. Humanity had taken a step beyond mere resistance. It was actively shaping its own future. Schools and universities adapted as well. They focused on practical skills, critical thinking, and problem solving. Young people were encouraged to participate in projects that could help communities and thus even contribute to scientific research. They learned the value of teamwork, resilience, and preparation. In doing so, they became part of the effort in a meaningful way. The empire might have expected fear or compliance, but it had instead created a generation determined to protect their world, and their freedom. Communication networks became stronger and information sharing more effective. Governments, scientists, and communities established systems to coordinate efforts. Knowledge about risks, preparations, and strategies was shared instantly. Ordinary citizens could access vital information, learn what to do, and contribute their skills to the collective effort. Trust grew as people realized that they were not alone. They were part of a global effort that spanned nations and cultures, all united by the same purpose: survival and freedom. The focus on preparation also created resilience in unexpected ways. People adapted to changes in daily life, learned new skills, and found ways to work together despite differences. Fear was still present, but it no longer controlled decisions. Hope and determination became the dominant forces. Humanity was not waiting for the empire to act. It was taking proactive steps, anticipating challenges, and finding solutions. Every small action was a building block in a larger effort, a collective strength that no empire could easily overcome. Humanity's response was not limited to the present. People were thinking about the future, imagining a world where freedom and cooperation were preserved. Strategies were developed, not just for immediate survival, but for long-term resilience. Citizens, leaders, and scientists all recognized that this was more than a battle against an external force. It was a test of humanity itself. Could humans work together, overcome fear, and protect their home? Every action, from the smallest community effort to the largest scientific breakthrough, was an answer to that question. Even in moments of exhaustion and doubt, people continued to act. They understood that preparation was not a temporary effort, it was a sustained commitment. Families, communities, and nations continued to build, train, and learn. Courage and determination became habits, not just reactions. Humanity was no longer waiting for events to unfold. It was shaping its destiny, step by step, with patience, intelligence, and care. The world's unity was perhaps the most remarkable achievement. Differences that had once caused division were now overshadowed by a shared purpose. Governments collaborated, communities supported one another, and individuals contributed in ways that mattered. People learned to trust, to share, and to act for the collective good. This unity was not imposed. It had grown naturally, born from the understanding that survival depended on cooperation and courage. As preparation continued, hope became stronger. People saw that their efforts were making a difference. Every innovation, every plan, every act of courage contributed to a growing sense of empowerment. Humanity was no longer passive. It had made a choice and was following through with every possible effort. The Empire had demanded submission, but Earth's response was the opposite: action, preparation, and determination. Humanity was answering with more than words. It was answering with purpose, skill, and unity. By the end of this phase, the planet had transformed. Fear had not disappeared, but it had been shaped into determination. Anxiety had become planning. Panic had become preparation. And humanity had begun to understand its own strength. Earth was no longer a passive target. It was an active participant in its destiny. The Empire's message had sparked a global awakening. Humanity was not just resisting. It was preparing to respond with intelligence, courage, and an unbreakable spirit. Every citizen, scientist, leader, and volunteer knew that the coming days would be critical. The world had done everything possible to prepare. And while no one knew exactly what would happen next, there was a shared confidence that, together, humans could face whatever the Empire might bring. Earth's answer was not yet fire, but it was determination, unity, and preparation. It was the foundation for the response that would soon become impossible to ignore. Humanity had chosen to fight, and it had begun to build the strength to do so. After weeks of preparation, the moment had arrived. Humanity was ready to move from planning to action. The decision to resist had already transformed the world, and now it was time to show that determination could be more than words. Every country, community, and individual who had contributed to the preparations understood that the coming actions could define the future. The first steps were cautious but decisive, carefully planned to make the greatest impact while protecting as much as possible. The world's scientists and strategists had worked tirelessly to identify opportunities. They analyzed the Empire's previous communications, studied their patterns, and looked for vulnerabilities. It was a delicate process, requiring intelligence, creativity, and cooperation on a scale never seen before. Every action was coordinated across continents, with teams in different time zones communicating in real time. This was not a single nation acting alone. It was humanity acting together as one. When the first actions were taken, they were precise and calculated. Rather than rushing blindly into conflict, humans focused on targets that could disrupt the Empire's plans without unnecessary risk. These actions were designed to show strength and capability, a signal that Earth was no longer passive. The strikes were small in scale compared to the Empire's vast power, but their effect was enormous. The message was clear. Humanity was awake, alert, and capable of action. Ordinary people watched and listened as news spread of the first successful operations. Across cities, towns, and villages, screens displayed reports, and communities gathered to discuss what had happened. There was pride in their eyes, courage in their hearts, and a growing sense that the impossible might be possible. Even those who were not directly involved felt a part of the effort. Every preparation, every plan, and every contribution was being validated. Humanity was proving to itself that it could act with intelligence and unity under extraordinary pressure. The first strikes were more than military maneuvers. They were demonstrations of ingenuity and adaptability. Engineers and scientists had developed methods to achieve maximum impact with limited resources. Every decision was the result of countless hours of research, collaboration, and planning. Civilians were proud to see their leaders and experts taking thoughtful, careful steps rather than rushing into chaos. The world had learned that courage without planning could be dangerous, but courage with preparation could be transformative. As the first actions unfolded, the Empire was taken by surprise. Their communications and signals had assumed compliance, not resistance. They had expected fear and hesitation, but instead they saw a planet capable of coordinated effort, creativity, and precision. Analysts in the Empire had to reconsider their assumptions. Humanity had shown that it was unpredictable, resilient, and determined. The very act of resistance began to change the dynamic, making it clear that Earth could not be easily subdued. Across the globe, people celebrated quietly, knowing that while the first strikes were successful, this was just the beginning. Fear had not disappeared, but it had been balanced by hope and determination. Communities continued to prepare, even as the first victories were recognized. Families, schools, and organizations doubled their efforts to stay ready. The understanding that survival depended on collective action was stronger than ever. Humanity was learning that each person's contribution mattered, no matter how small, and that together, even the most overwhelming challenges could be faced. The first strikes also inspired innovation. Scientists and engineers saw their work validated, and they quickly adapted to new developments. New technologies were tested, improved, and deployed. Communication networks became even more efficient, allowing for rapid sharing of knowledge. Communities found new ways to support each other, from sharing resources to providing training and guidance. The actions were not isolated events. They were part of a larger wave of human ingenuity and cooperation that continued to grow. The psychological impact was equally profound. People realized that fear could be transformed into action. Nervousness and uncertainty became focus and preparation. Courage was no longer abstract. It was tangible in every lab, every training exercise, every coordinated plan. Humanity was beginning to understand that survival was not about waiting for help or hoping for mercy. It was about taking responsibility, working together, and acting decisively. The first strikes had changed how people saw themselves. They were no longer passive. They were active participants in shaping their destiny. Even in ordinary life, the changes were noticeable. People became more mindful, cooperative, and resilient. Communities worked together more closely. Families communicated more clearly. Young people learned problem-solving, leadership, and teamwork. Every small effort became part of a global strategy. The Empire had demanded submission, but humanity's response was a mixture of preparation, courage, and action that no one could have anticipated. The first strikes were not just physical actions. They were symbols of a planet, united in determination. As the initial operations continued, Earth began to gain confidence. Every successful move strengthened resolve, teaching people that intelligence and unity could overcome fear. Governments, scientists, and citizens shared information more openly, collaborating in ways that had been unimaginable before. Even those far from the front lines felt that they were part of something larger than themselves. Humanity had learned that resistance was not the work of a few. It was the collective effort of everyone willing to act. The first strikes also changed how people imagined the future. They began to believe that Earth could not only survive, but respond intelligently and creatively to the Empire's demands. This hope became a source of strength. Ordinary citizens, who had once felt powerless, now realized that their knowledge, courage, and cooperation were vital. Every school project, every community drill, every shared idea contributed to the planet's growing ability to defend itself. Humanity's potential had been awakened. And the first strike was proof that action was possible. By the end of this stage, the world had learned a crucial lesson. Fear could no longer dictate behavior. Every person, organization, and nation had a role to play, and every action mattered. Humanity had proven that it could act decisively and intelligently, even when faced with overwhelming power. The first strike was not just a military maneuver. It was a statement of identity, courage, and unity. Earth had shown that it would not be a passive target, and that humanity could shape its own destiny through preparation, intelligence, and collective action. The stage was now set for the next chapter. Humanity had taken its first decisive steps, moving from preparation to action. The first strikes had sent a clear message to the Empire. Earth would not submit without a fight. More importantly, they had sent a message to humanity itself. Together, people could achieve what once seemed impossible. The planet had begun to answer with fire, not uncontrolled chaos, but deliberate, intelligent, and united action. Humanity had learned its strength, and it would continue to build on it in the days to come. The first strikes had been a success, but humanity knew that survival was not just about a single act. It was about persistence, learning, and growth. The world had shown courage, intelligence, and unity, but the challenge from the Empire was far from over. People understood that the future would be shaped not by fear, but by determination and cooperation. Humanity had proven that it could resist, but now it had to continue building its strength, expanding its knowledge, and solidifying its unity to face whatever came next. Every nation, community, and individual continued to contribute. Scientists and engineers advanced their research, creating systems that could detect, defend, and respond quickly to any threat. New communication networks were built to connect people across continents, ensuring that no information would be lost and that every contribution could reach those who needed it. Communities strengthened their bonds, sharing resources, skills, and knowledge. Even ordinary acts, like helping a neighbor or teaching someone new skills, became part of a larger effort. Humanity was learning that every contribution mattered. The psychological effect of the first successes was profound. People felt empowered, capable, and connected. Fear no longer dominated their thoughts. Instead, hope, determination, and pride filled hearts and minds. Citizens understood that their actions, even the small ones, had real impact. Families worked together to plan for emergencies. Children learned resilience and teamwork, and adults taught practical skills in problem solving. Courage had become a shared habit, cultivated through preparation, action, and collaboration. Governments and leaders recognized that humanity's greatest strength was unity. Borders, politics, and disagreements became secondary to the common goal of survival and freedom. International cooperation reached unprecedented levels. Countries shared research, resources, and strategies openly, focusing on solutions rather than competition. Every nation understood that the future of Earth depended on acting together. The planet had become a single, united entity, working to protect itself and its people. Innovation continued at an extraordinary pace. Scientists, engineers, and inventors pushed beyond what had once seemed possible. Technologies were developed not only for defense, but also for communication, transportation, and infrastructure. Communities embraced creative solutions, adapting to challenges with ingenuity. Even small innovations like improved emergency systems, efficient resource management, and new problem-solving methods added to the collective strength of humanity. Each breakthrough reinforced the understanding that people could shape their destiny through intelligence, effort, and cooperation. The first strikes had sent a message to the Empire, but they had also sent a message to humanity itself. People realized that they were capable of extraordinary things when united by purpose. Ordinary citizens felt that they were part of something greater than themselves. Teachers inspired curiosity, Students learned leadership and teamwork, and families strengthened their bonds. Humanity's confidence grew with every success, every lesson learned, and every small contribution made. The planet had awakened to its own potential. As time passed, the world continued to adapt. People learned to anticipate challenges, respond quickly, and support one another. Communities became stronger, more resilient, and more connected. Citizens understood that survival depended on collaboration and shared responsibility. Even as threats persisted, humanity had developed the confidence and skills to meet them. Fear had been transformed into preparation, hope, and courage. Humanity was no longer passive. It was active, determined, and ready to shape its own future. The Empire had assumed that submission was inevitable, but humanity's response had rewritten the rules. Earth had shown that intelligence, unity, and courage could defy even the most powerful adversaries. Analysts in the Empire were forced to reconsider their assumptions. Humanity had demonstrated creativity, adaptability, and resilience. The planet had become unpredictable, resourceful, and strong. Submission was no longer an option, and the Empire had to recognize that Earth could act with strategy and strength. This realization inspired even greater efforts. Communities, governments, and individuals continued to strengthen themselves. Schools emphasized critical thinking and problem-solving. Families practiced resilience and cooperation. Scientists refined their discoveries. Engineers improved infrastructure, and volunteers helped wherever they were needed. Every action contributed to the collective power of humanity. The planet was not just surviving. It was growing stronger, smarter, and more united every day. Humanity's achievements were not only practical but symbolic. The planet had faced an overwhelming threat and refused to bow. Courage, intelligence, and cooperation had become the foundation of survival. People understood that freedom, dignity, and hope were worth every effort. Ordinary citizens realized that their daily actions mattered, that they were part of something far larger than themselves. Each contribution reinforced the belief that together, humanity could overcome challenges far beyond what anyone had imagined. As humanity continued to grow stronger, a new era began. Fear and uncertainty no longer defined the world. People had learned to act decisively, cooperate globally, and innovate creatively. Humanity had discovered its own resilience and power. Communities, nations, and individuals had become interconnected in ways that allowed them to face the Empire with courage and strategy. The planet had not just survived. It had awakened to its own strength, intelligence, and potential. The Empire had demanded submission, but Earth had answered with something far greater. It had answered with unity, courage, and determination. Humanity had shown that survival was not about passivity or fear. It was about preparation, action, and cooperation. People had learned that intelligence, creativity, and shared responsibility could defy even overwhelming odds. The planet had become a symbol of resilience, hope, and human spirit. By the end of this chapter, humanity had not only defended itself, but had also discovered its own identity. People understood that they were capable of extraordinary things when united by purpose and guided by intelligence. The first strikes, the preparations, the cooperation, all of it had led to a new understanding of what it meant to be human. Earth had faced an empire and refused to surrender. It had answered with fire, not only in actions but in spirit, courage, and determination. The story of humanity's response became a lesson for generations. It showed that fear could be transformed into courage, that preparation and unity could overcome even the greatest challenges, and that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when working together. Humanity had written its own destiny, proving that freedom, dignity, and hope were worth every effort. The planet had emerged stronger, smarter, and more united than ever before. In the end, The Empire had underestimated the greatest power on Earth, the will of its people. Humanity had faced fear, uncertainty, and overwhelming odds, and it had answered with intelligence, courage, and unity. The planet had become a beacon of resilience and hope. From this moment onward, humanity knew its strength and its purpose. It had learned that survival was not about waiting for help. It was about acting together, thinking creatively, and refusing to bow to any force, no matter how powerful. Earth had been tested, and it had passed. The Empire had demanded submission, but humanity had answered with fire. And in that fire burned something that no power could extinguish: the spirit of a united, determined, and courageous world. Humanity had faced the impossible and emerged stronger. It had discovered its own power, its own identity, and its own destiny. The planet, once threatened, had become a force of resilience, courage, and hope. A new era had begun.